In The White House Effect, directors Bonnie Cohen, Pedro Cos, and John Shanks document how a chance to take real action on global warming was not just squandered but deliberately undermined by the George H.W. Bush administration, 1988 to 1992. Bush took office in 1988, which, at the time, was the planet's hottest year on record. The former president promised to take on the greenhouse effect with what he called the White House Effect and tackle the problem head-on. The doc uses only archival footage to tell the story of how seeds of disinformation around climate change were sown in America 3 decades ago. In the film, the schism between action and denial plays out in the Oval Office as Bush's head of the Environmental Protection Agency William Riley and his chief of staff John Sununu face off over setting limits on fossil fuel emissions. The White House Effect concludes with Bush's arrival in Rio in 1992, where the United States not only breaks its own promises but undermines the entire global project to set real limits on emissions by the year 2000, setting the stage for the world's current climate crisis. Variety spoke to the White House Effect directors Cohen, Cos, and Schenck ahead of the doc's Telluride Film Festival premiere on August 31. What was the impetus for making this doc? Schenck, for decades climate change has infamously been a difficult story to tell. It's almost too big for a single human mind and heart to conceive of what's at stake. It never dawned on us to tell the history of how we got to where we are today until we read this great New York Times Magazine article by Nathaniel Rich called Losing Earth, the decade we almost stopped climate change, about what happened in the 1980s. It was an epiphany for us that there were real characters involved that could tell that dramatic story. Cohen, John and Pedro and I have made a lot of films about climate heroes. Those films did great work, but we were looking for subject matter in the climate space that wasn't necessarily just preaching to the choir. And we dove back into this very dramatic moment, this 4-year period in American history where all these things aligned. The climate science was in. We knew global warming existed. There was a drought in the country. The American people, from farmers to businessmen, were on alert. So, we were set to do the right thing. And what the film explores is how Bush had this drama unfold inside of his administration, a standoff between his chief of staff John Sununu and his EPA administrator Bill Riley, like the devil and the angel on his shoulders. The American economy was tanking. There were issues with the oil companies and Bush ends up turning his back on global warming.